Welcome back to our channel. Today is an absolutely beautiful day to be a fan, and we are so thrilled to dive deep into the absolute madness that has taken over Port Charles this. Let's get right into it. The air in the Quartermain boathouse felt thick enough to choke on, a suffocating tension that finally shattered the moment Drew Kane stepped out of the ship. This was the seismic shift in momentum we have been holding our breath for, a cinematic masterpiece of a confrontation that presented impossible choices and ended in absolute tragedy. The power dynamic in Port Charles has just violently flipped, and the shockwaves are going to level everyone involved. I am genuinely in awe of the sheer brilliance unfolding on our screens right now. I feel so incredibly validated by that chilling scene at the Quartermain boathouse, because to me it finally proved that the writers knew exactly what they were doing with Drew's recovery. I love the way the lighting changed when Drew cornered Nina Reeves. The heavy slanting shadows cast across his face made him look like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. When he spoke, his voice was no longer the raspy, struggling sound of a recovering patient, but a cold, lethal weapon. I think the writer's choice to have them meet at the boathouse, the exact location near the lake where Nina previously shoved his wheelchair into the water, was brilliant, because it made me feel the poetic justice radiating from the screen. Every step he took toward her was a masterclass in intimidation. I know a lot of people are saying this storyline is dragging, or that Drew's locked-in state lasted too long, but I actually think the slow burn is exactly what's needed, because I feel like the payoff we just witnessed wouldn't have been nearly as satisfying without it. The way I see it, Drew needed to suffer in silence, trapped in his own body, while Willow and Nina controlled his every waking moment, so that his vengeance would feel earned. I believe his dialogue during the boathouse confrontation backed up my take perfectly. When he leaned in and hissed at Nina, recounting the exact terror he felt as the dark water closed over his head, I felt a genuine chill run down my spine. He wasn't just angry, he was fundamentally broken and reforged into something terrifying. The physical struggle between Drew and Nina was choreographed with such raw, visceral desperation that I couldn't look away. I feel like this is the best they've written Drew, because he didn't just attack her, he psychologically dismantled her until she confessed. When he finally forced Nina to admit out loud that she pushed his wheelchair into the lake, the sheer panic in her eyes was incredibly palpable. I think her slipping and falling backward was the perfect tragic accident, born entirely out of the sheer terror Drew instilled in her. The sickening sound of her head striking the wooden edge of the boat was a brilliant piece of sound design that made me physically gasp. It wasn't a calculated murder in the traditional sense, but the way I interpret it, Drew's relentless psychological pressure is what truly killed her. What happened next is what truly cemented my absolute love for where this show is heading right now. I feel a deep, dark fascination with Drew's immediate reaction to Nina's lifeless body. He didn't panic. He didn't reach for his phone to call 911. Instead, his eyes went completely dead, devoid of any humanity. I believe the way he coldly and methodically staged the scene to look like a panic-induced accident is the most compelling character evolution we've seen in years. Watching him meticulously wipe his fingerprints from the boathouse door and position her body to perfectly align with a tragic slip made me feel both horrified and utterly captivated. He was erasing his presence with the cold precision of a ghost, turning a moment of chaotic violence into a chillingly sterile tableau. I know there will be massive outcry from the fandom about Nina Reeves meeting such an abrupt and brutal end, but I genuinely think we're missing the point if we view this as just another shock value death. In my opinion, Nina's demise is the ultimate, tragic culmination of her own recklessness. I feel a profound sense of sorrow for her, but when I look back at the scene where she shoved a paralyzed man into the freezing lake to protect her daughter, I realize she sealed her own fate. I love the subtle tragedy in her final moments, the way she reached out, desperately trying to find purchase, only to grasp. It felt like a visual metaphor for her entire life in Port Charles, constantly reaching for control and love, only to fall into the abyss. The ripple effects of this tragedy are already producing some of the most compelling television I have ever watched. I feel absolutely gutted by Willow's reaction to the news of her mother's death. When the PCPD arrived at her door and delivered the devastating blow, the way she physically collapsed onto the floor, clutching her chest, was a masterclass in. I think the absolute tragic irony here is that Willow is mourning the woman who died directly because of the monster they collaboratively created. The way I interpret Willow's tears is that they aren't just for Nina, they are for the illusion of safety she thought she had secured. She traded Drew an immediate divorce for his silence, dropping her wedding ring on the floor and thinking she had won, but now she has lost her mother to the very silence she. I believe the true genius of this storyline lies in the psychological warfare Drew is currently waging. I feel an intense, almost uncomfortable thrill watching Drew play the role of the grieving ex-husband. When he arrived to comfort a shattered Willow, the false sympathy in his eyes was deeply unsettling. I think the writers are brilliantly highlighting his sociopathic turn by having him pull Willow into a hug, knowing full well he is the architect of her despair. When the camera lingered on Drew's face over Willow's shoulder, and he offered that slight, chilling smirk, it proved to me that his revenge is only just beginning. He isn't satisfied with Nina's death. He wants to dismantle Willow's entire existence piece by piece. This brings me to the absolute highlight of the fallout, Michael Corinthos. I feel so energized by Michael's entry into this fray because he is the only one who sees through Drew's facade. I love the scene where Michael stood across the room, watching Drew console Willow. The subtle narrowing of Michael's eyes and the clenching of his jaw told me everything I needed to know. I believe Michael is absolutely right here, and here's why his dialogue backed up my take. When he muttered to himself that Drew's miraculous recovery and Nina's sudden death were far too convenient, it showed that the ruthless, calculating Corinthos instincts are fully activated. Michael is not a man who believes in coincidences, especially not when it comes to the safety of his family. I know some viewers might find Michael's immediate pivot to custody strategies a bit cold, but I actually think it perfectly aligns with his character's history. The way I see it, Michael has been playing a long, frustrating game against Willow, much to the exasperation of his current girlfriend. I feel like Nina's death and Drew's highly suspicious behavior have finally given Michael the opening he has been waiting for. I think the scene where Michael immediately contacted his lawyers, barely hours after the tragedy, was a brilliant showcase of his protective ruthlessness. He isn't just trying to hurt Willow, he genuinely believes that the environment she has created, surrounded by death, lies, and a potentially homicidal Drew, is fundamentally unsafe for Wiley and Amelia. I feel incredibly invested in the impending custody war, because it is rooted in so much complex history. I believe Michael's decision to launch a new legal battle for the children is the most logical narrative progression. When he looked at a photo of Wiley and Amelia and vowed that he wouldn't let them be raised in a house of horrors, it made me feel a deep surge of support for him. I think the writer's choice to have Michael use Drew's presence as the primary weapon in his custody suit is a stroke of genius. It traps Willow in an impossible paradox. She knows Drew is dangerous, but she cannot expose him without exposing her own crimes of drugging and paralyzing him in the first place. She's entirely boxed in by her own deceit. I feel a profound sense of anxiety for Willow, even though I believe she brought much of this upon. The way I interpret her current psychological state, she is a woman completely suffocated by her own secret. I love the visual storytelling in the scene where she stood alone in her darkened living room, the very place Drew had cornered her days prior. The shadows seemed to press in on her, reflecting how entirely isolated she is. She has lost Michael, she has lost her mother, and she is legally bound to a man who holds the power to destroy her life. I think her trembling hands as she held Nina's scarf prove that she is rapidly approaching a total mental collapse. I genuinely think we're missing the point if we don't recognize Drew Kane as the most compelling villain Port Charles has seen in a decade. I feel like his transition from a victim of circumstance to a master manipulator is flawless. Look at how he previously asserted control over Scout, marching over to Alexis Davis's house to demand access to his daughter. That was the precursor to this. I believe his actions at the boathouse were simply the ultimate manifestation of his need to reclaim his power. The way he meticulously wiped down that boathouse door wasn't just about avoiding prison. It was about asserting his absolute dominance over the narrative. He controls the truth now, and he wields it like a blade. I cannot stop thinking about the specific details of the boathouse confrontation. I love the way the ambient noise of the lake, the gentle lapping of the water against the docks, contrasted so sharply with the violent tension inside the street. I feel like the director intentionally used the sound of the water to remind us, and Nina, of her original sin. When Drew forced her to look out at the dark lake, his dialogue was dripping with venom. "You thought the water would keep my secrets, Nina," he whispered, and that line delivery gave me absolute chills. It was a poetic, terrifying full-circle moment that anchored my entire emotional investment. I also want to touch on how this impacts Michael's current life. I feel like Jacinda has been a fascinating lens through which to view Michael's obsession with Willow. I think Jacinda is absolutely right to be wary of how deeply Michael is diving back into Willow's orbit, even if it is adversarial. The way I interpret their recent scenes, Jacinda's frustration is mounting because she sees Michael becoming consumed by the need to defeat his ex-wife. When Jacinda warned him that a custody battle against a grieving woman might backfire, it made me feel the immense stakes of Michael's game. He is risking his current happiness, and potentially his sanity, to secure his children's future against an invisible threat. As we look ahead, I feel an overwhelming sense of anticipation for the inevitable collision between Michael Corinthos and Drew Kane. I believe these two men are currently the most dangerous forces on the planet. Drew is operating with the cold, detached precision of a man who has nothing left to lose, while Michael is operating with the fierce, protective instincts of a father who has everything to gain. I loved the brief, tense standoff they shared in the hospital corridor. The unspoken threats passing between them, the rigid posture, the absolute refusal to back down it was electrifying. I think this storyline is working so well because it isn't just about a murder cover-up. It is a battle for the very soul of this family, and I am here for every single second of it. What will happen when the truth about the boathouse finally shatters the remaining pieces? Drop your wildest theories in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives.